This story is titled, My Daughter and Son Chose Unfaithful Mother After Divorce. Now they're begging to come back after my fortune grew. Hey everyone, I'm 53 years old, and I need to get something off my chest after keeping it bottled up for 8 years. I'll be using different names throughout this story to maintain anonymity. I was married to my wife Rebecca for 25 years. I'm 53 now, and she's 51. We have 2 children, Lucas, 27, and Katie, 25, who have both moved out and started their own lives. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family, but the reality was completely different. Before we had kids, Rebecca worked as an operations director at a marketing agency. She was exceptionally talented at her job and thrived in the corporate environment. When Lucas was born, she decided to become a stay-at-home mom. I fully supported her decision. At the time, I was working as a cybersecurity consultant at a major corporation, and we thought we could manage on my income alone. Rebecca would focus on raising our children while I handled the financial responsibilities. I respected her choice and believed we were working as a team to build our family. For a while, everything worked perfectly. Rebecca handled all the parenting duties, school runs, homework help, and everything else that comes with raising kids. I always made sure to tell her how much I appreciated her efforts, especially when I couldn't be there to help. Our arrangement seemed to be working well and our family life was stable. But things started to change as the kids got older. Money became increasingly tight, and raising 2 children on a single income wasn't easy. Every unexpected expense became a huge problem. Car repairs, school trips, even basic shopping felt like a mountain to climb. The financial strain was becoming overwhelming. I started picking up extra hours whenever possible, working late nights and weekends just trying to keep everything stable. I hated every minute of it. Some days I left before the kids woke up and came home after they were asleep. Rebecca constantly pointed out how little time I spent with them, and she wasn't wrong. But what choice did I have? We needed money to survive, and I was doing everything I could to provide for my family. Even though I was trying my best, Rebecca became more and more resentful. I could tell she felt trapped. She had given up her career for our family, and now that the kids were older, there wasn't much left for her to focus on. She would make hurtful comments about other families, pointing out how they seemed to have everything figured out while we were just getting by. Her words stung deeply. I already felt like a failure for not providing a better life for my family, and her comments only made it worse. Then things started changing in weird ways. Rebecca became obsessed with her appearance, getting expensive haircuts every month, buying designer clothes we couldn't afford, and wearing makeup even when staying home. She started going out more frequently, always saying she was meeting old friends or attending some community events. I didn't question it at first. I thought maybe she needed time for herself, and I wanted to be a supportive husband, not the controlling type. But something felt off. She'd come home late at night, wearing expensive perfume I never bought her, and would brush off my questions about where she'd been. Everything hit a breaking point one Tuesday evening when she said she had a book club meeting at 8 p.m. Who has a book club meeting that late? Something wasn't adding up, and I did something I never thought I would. I decided to follow her. She left the house dressed like she was going to a fancy dinner, which already seemed suspicious. I kept my distance in my car and followed her across town. She pulled into the parking lot of a fancy wine bar. I parked far enough away that she wouldn't notice me and waited about 10 minutes before watching her walk inside. I saw her sit with a guy I didn't know. He looked to be in his mid-40s, a bit younger than us. They were laughing and acting like they were the only people in the world. I told myself it could be innocent, maybe an old friend or someone from her volunteer work. But then they got up, walked out holding hands, and got into his Mercedes. I followed them to a Marriott hotel downtown. They didn't even try to hide it. They walked right in together. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, trying to process what I had just seen. Part of me wanted to storm in and confront them both, but another part knew it was pointless. I had seen enough. I drove home in complete silence, packed an overnight bag, and left a note on the kitchen counter that simply read, "I know what you're doing. Don't bother lying." Then I went to crash at my friend's place for the night. The next morning, I called a divorce lawyer first thing. When I confronted Rebecca, she didn't even try to deny anything. She just sat there, calm as ever, like she'd been expecting this conversation all along. When I told her what I saw, the wine bar, the hotel, She just nodded slowly and said, "Well, I guess there's no point in lying, is there?" She admitted everything without hesitation. She had been seeing a guy named Thomas for almost a year. It wasn't just some random affair. Thomas was loaded. He owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the state and had a massive estate in the rich part of town. According to Rebecca, he understood her in ways I never could. Those were her exact words. She didn't even try to sugarcoat anything. There were no tears, no begging for forgiveness, nothing at all. It was like she'd been waiting for me to figure it out so she could finally move on with her life. She started listing off reasons like she was reading a business report. She was lonely, we drifted apart, she missed feeling wanted. Then she hit me with the worst part. "You've been so focused on work for years. I didn't think you even noticed me anymore." As if that somehow made her sneaking around okay. I just stood there and let her talk, but inside I was absolutely furious. She'd traded 25 years of marriage for someone with a bigger bank account and wasn't even pretending to feel bad about it. The only time she hesitated was when I said I was filing for divorce. "You're sure about that?" she asked, tilting her head like she was surprised I'd actually follow through. "I'm done," I told her. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She didn't argue, just said, "All right, I guess this is for the best." She was so cold, so calculated, like this was just another step in her master plan. Filing for divorce ended up being easier than I expected. I think I had been mentally checked out of the marriage for a while, and once I had a solid reason to leave, I didn't hesitate for a second. The hardest part wasn't leaving Rebecca. It was knowing I had to tell Lucas and Katie. They were adults, but this wasn't some small thing I could hide. I knew it would hit them hard. What I didn't expect was how little support I would get from the two people I thought would have my back. I decided to tell the kids separately. I started with Lucas, thinking he'd be the more level-headed one. We met at an old-school diner near his place, the kind that serves greasy burgers and coffee that tastes like engine oil. I found him sitting there, scrolling through his phone when I walked in. I sat down across from him and made some small talk first, then just ripped the Band-Aid off. "I'm divorcing your mom," I said. Lucas's face went completely blank. He put his phone down slowly. "Why?" he asked. I told him straight up, "She's been having an affair." I kept my voice steady. I didn't want to sound like I was fishing for sympathy. "I saw her with the guy. She admitted everything when I confronted her. I thought Lucas would understand. I mean, cheating is cheating, right?" Instead, he leaned back in the booth and let out this long, dramatic sigh, like I'd just told him his favorite sports team had lost a game. "Dad, come on," he said. "Are you sure you're not blowing this out of proportion? Maybe you two just need counseling or something." "Blowing it out of proportion?" I had to repeat it. "She's been seeing this guy for almost a year. It's not a misunderstanding. It's over." Lucas didn't look convinced at all. "Yeah, but Mom's been a stay-at-home mom for years," he countered. "Don't you think maybe she felt stuck? Lonely? You've been working a lot and maybe she needed to cheat on me?" I cut him off. If she felt stuck or lonely, she could have talked to me. She didn't. She chose to sneak around instead. Lucas just shrugged like it wasn't even a big deal. "I'm just saying maybe you shouldn't rush into divorce. You've been married for 25 years. That's worth something, isn't it?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I sat there completely stunned while Lucas went on and on about how divorce would complicate things and how I needed to think about what it would do to the family. Not once did he say Rebecca was wrong. Not once did he say he understood where I was coming from. By the time I left the diner, it was crystal clear. Lucas wasn't on my side. I thought Katie might be different, but boy, was I wrong about that too. I met Katie at a park near her apartment and walked her through everything that happened. She didn't even blink. Okay, she said when I finished explaining. "So what are you going to do?" "I've already filed for divorce," I told her. She crossed her arms and frowned like a disappointed teacher. "Isn't that a little drastic? I mean, Mom made a mistake, sure. But are you seriously just giving up on your marriage?" "She didn't make a mistake, Katie," I said to her, trying not to sound as frustrated as I felt. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something hurtful in a fight. This is something else entirely." Katie shook her head at me like I was a stupid child who didn't understand. "You don't get it. Mom gave up everything for us, her career, her independence. She put it all on hold to raise me and Lucas while you worked. Don't you think maybe that took a toll on her? Maybe she just needed to cheat on me. I interrupted her. Why does everyone keep acting like this is my fault? Nobody's saying it's your fault, Katie shot back. I'm just saying it's not black and white. People aren't perfect, Dad. Mom made a mistake, but that doesn't mean you should throw away 25 years of marriage. It was like talking to a brick wall. No matter what I said, Katie kept going back to the same thing. How much Rebecca had sacrificed for our family, and how I needed to think about the bigger picture. When I told her the divorce wasn't up for debate, she got super defensive. Well, if you're set on this, don't expect me to take sides, she declared. I'm not asking you to take sides, I told her, though I was starting to realize that's exactly what she'd already done. By the end of our conversation, I was completely exhausted. Lucas and Katie weren't just unsupportive. They were outright dismissive of everything I'd been through. It felt like they were more concerned about Rebecca's feelings than mine, like her betrayal was somehow justified because she'd been lonely or had sacrificed too much. And the worst part was, Rebecca didn't even care. Over the next few weeks, things got even worse. Lucas and Katie started pulling away. They'd always been good about keeping in touch, calling or texting regularly. Now I was lucky to hear from them once a month. When I tried to check in, conversations were short and awkward. I could tell they were spending more time with Rebecca and Thomas. I would see pictures on social media of family dinners, birthday parties, and holiday celebrations. I wasn't in any of them. They didn't completely cut me off, but the message was clear. I wasn't part of their inner circle anymore. The final blow hit a few months after the divorce was finalized. Katie called out of nowhere, saying she wanted to share some news. She'd gotten engaged. For a brief moment, I felt like I was part of her life again. My little girl was getting married, and she actually thought to call and tell me. I congratulated her, my voice cracking a little bit. I told her how happy I was for her and asked about wedding plans. There was a pause on the line. In that split second, I knew something was wrong. Well, Mom and Thomas will be there, she said quietly, like that explained everything. I frowned in confusion. So? I replied. So it'd be awkward if you came. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I froze completely. Awkward? Awkward for who? I wanted to scream. My daughter was telling me point blank that I wasn't welcome at her own wedding because it might ruffle Rebecca and Thomas's feathers. The guy my wife cheated with, the one who wrecked our family, had a spot at the wedding. He would be walking her down the aisle, but her own father wasn't even invited. You're serious? I asked, my throat feeling tight. It's just, you know how things are, she said, sounding uncomfortable, but not sorry at all. It'll be easier this way. Easier for who? I wanted to ask. Definitely not for me. I sat there gripping the phone, trying to hold it together. All right, I said finally, because what else could I say? That was it. I wasn't invited to my own daughter's wedding. I sat there holding the phone, my chest feeling heavy, like someone had punched a hole through it and left nothing but empty space. Just when I thought it couldn't hurt more, Lucas followed suit a few months later. His excuse was almost identical. Mom and Thomas will be there. You won't be comfortable if you come. Hearing it from him was like a knife twisting in my chest. Lucas had always been the one I thought could reason with, the one who'd eventually understand. But no, he'd made his choice too. At that moment, I realized I hadn't just lost my wife. I'd lost my kids too. Rebecca hadn't just cheated and moved on with a rich guy. She'd managed to pull Lucas and Katie into her corner and shut me out completely. It felt like she'd won, like she'd taken everything from me and left me standing in the wreckage of a life I'd spent decades building. But I couldn't just let it go. I kept trying. I would send Lucas and Katie texts and leave voicemails. Just checking in. Hope you're doing well. Sometimes they'd reply with short, polite messages, 1 or 2 words at most. More often than not, my messages went unanswered. There was this one night, about 9 months after the divorce, when I was feeling especially lonely. The house was too quiet. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days except people at work. On impulse, I decided to call Lucas. When he picked up, I could hear a TV playing in the background. Hey, Lucas, I said, trying to sound upbeat. I was just thinking, why don't you and your fiancé come over for dinner one night this week? It's been a while. I would love to catch up. There was a long pause on his end. Then he sighed. I'd like to, Dad, but we're super busy right now. Wedding planning, you know. Maybe some other time. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile he couldn't see. Sure, I get it. Another time. Yeah, for sure, he said. I'll call you when things settle down. He didn't call. That was the moment it fully sank in. I wasn't a priority in their lives anymore, just an obligation they'd occasionally remember when it was convenient. The hope I'd been holding on to started fading little by little. I tried convincing myself it was better this way, that staying in a marriage where I wasn't respected would have been worse. But there was always this gnawing voice in the back of my head, wondering if I'd made the wrong choice. Should I have fought harder? Should I have swallowed my pride and stuck it out for the sake of the family? I never got an answer. Life just moved on without me. I spent the next 8 years keeping my head down and throwing myself into work. Honestly, it wasn't because I loved my job. It was more about survival. I was 53 years old and starting over. I needed something to keep me going, and work was all I had. The job wasn't thrilling, but it paid the bills and kept me busy. Most days I would bury myself in work, fixing network issues and helping coworkers with tech problems. The kind of work that didn't require much emotional investment, which was exactly what I needed at the time. Then Oliver came along. He was one of those guys who was always thinking 10 steps ahead, the type of coworker who'd pitch ideas during coffee breaks like he was on Dragon's Den. One day he pulled me aside and asked, "Ever think about doing your own thing? Starting something from scratch?" At first I laughed it off. "Oliver, I'm not exactly a risk taker," I told him, but he kept pushing the idea. His plan was to launch a tech consulting firm specializing in cybersecurity. He said there was growing demand and we could make a name for ourselves if we played it right. The more he talked, the more it made sense. I had the technical experience, and he had the business sense. After weeks of late-night conversations over greasy Chinese takeout, I finally agreed to give it a shot. "What have I got to lose?" I told him. The first couple of years were absolute hell. We worked insane hours, juggling day jobs while building the business. Some nights I fell asleep at my desk. We hit roadblocks constantly, clients backing out at the last minute, budget problems, more stress than I had ever dealt with before. But we kept pushing forward and didn't give up. Slowly, things started clicking together. We landed a few big contracts, built a solid reputation, and started delivering real results. Eventually, the business really took off. By the time I hit 58, I was doing better than I ever had before. I wasn't super rich, but I was comfortable for the first time in my life. I moved out of my depressing apartment into a modest but cozy house with a nice yard and everything. I even managed to build some savings, something I never thought I would have after the divorce wiped me out. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my life. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually thriving. I kept to myself mostly and focused on work. I kept my personal life simple. I started dating again, and then I met Diana. She was a widow who had lost her husband in a car accident 2 years earlier. We clicked right away. She was amazing. After 1 year, we got married and had a beautiful baby girl. We named her Amy. Life became quiet, and I really liked it that way. Then out of nowhere, Lucas and Katie showed up at my door. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in the middle of mowing the lawn when I saw their car pull into the driveway. At first, I thought I was seeing things. I hadn't seen either of them in years, and now here they were, stepping out of the car like nothing had happened. I killed the mower and walked over, not sure what to expect. "Dad," Katie said, smiling like we'd just spoken yesterday. Lucas was right behind her, holding a toddler I assumed was his kid. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they were here to reconnect, to finally mend the gap between us. "It's been too long," Katie said, giving me a quick hug. "Yeah, it has," I replied, still trying to process what was happening. We stood there in awkward silence for a few seconds before Lucas cleared his throat. "Mind if we come in?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. They walked in like they owned the place and started commenting on the house. How nice it was. How much I'd really come up in the world. I didn't pick up on the vibe then. I was too caught up in the moment. We sat in the living room, and I couldn't help but notice how overly friendly they were being. Lucas asked about work, Katie complimented the house, and both kept throwing in comments about how much they'd missed me. Then, after about 20 minutes of small talk, the real reason they were here came out. "Dad," Lucas started, leaning forward in his chair, "we need to ask you something." "Sure," I said, still completely oblivious. He glanced at Katie. She gave him a quick nod, and then he just said it. "We could really use your help financially." I just stared at them, waiting for some explanation. Katie jumped in quickly. "It's not for us exactly," she said. "It's for the kids. We've had some tough times lately." It turns out Thomas's car dealership business had taken a nosedive. Both Lucas and Katie had been working for him, and now the money was drying up. They were struggling to make ends meet. "So what are you asking?" I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "Well," Katie said, "we thought maybe you could help us out a little. You know, just until we get back on our feet." That flicker of hope I felt earlier was completely gone now. They didn't come to reconnect. They didn't come because they missed me or wanted to make things right. They came because they'd heard I was doing well financially and now wanted a piece of it. "I'll think about it," I said, keeping my face neutral. They left soon after, thanking me like I'd already agreed to bail them out. The second they were gone, I sat down and blocked their numbers. 8 years of silence, and this is why they came back. It wasn't about family. It wasn't about healing old wounds. It was about money. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. They weren't done yet. A week later, they showed up at my office, unannounced and completely uninvited. I was in the middle of a meeting with a client when my assistant knocked on the door. "There are 2 people in the lobby," she said. "They say they need to see you. They didn't have an appointment." "Tell them to leave their names. I'll get back to them," I said, annoyed. She hesitated. "They're saying they're your kids." My stomach dropped. Of course it was Lucas and Katie. I told her to ask them to wait, figuring I'd deal with them after my meeting. But apparently, patience wasn't their thing. Not 5 minutes later, I heard voices down the hall. They'd pushed past my assistant and walked straight into the conference room, dragging their kids with them. "Dad, we need to talk," Lucas said, completely ignoring the fact that I was sitting at a table with 2 clients and my business partner. I stood up, trying to keep my composure. "I'm in the middle of something," I said. "This can't wait," Katie said, planting herself at the head of the table like she owned the place. I glanced at Oliver, who looked completely confused, then turned back to them. "Fine. Wait in my office. I'll be there when I'm done." Lucas opened his mouth to argue, but Katie grabbed his arm and dragged him out, muttering something under her breath. I apologized to my clients and wrapped up the meeting as fast as possible, then headed to my office, already dreading what was waiting. When I walked in, Lucas was pacing the room while Katie sat on the couch, bouncing a fussy toddler on her lap. Neither looked happy. "You've got some nerve," Lucas said as soon as the door closed. I raised an eyebrow at him. "Excuse me?" "Blocking us, ignoring our calls," he snapped. "We're your family, Dad. You don't just shut us out like that." I leaned against my desk, crossing my arms. "Funny, that's exactly what you did to me. For years. Or did you forget about that?" Katie sighed, clearly trying to play mediator. "Look, we get it, okay? We screwed up, but we're trying to fix things. That's why we came here today." "No, you're here because I wouldn't hand over money," I said. "It's not about the money," Lucas said, his voice rising. "It's about the kids. They deserve to know their grandfather." I glanced at the toddler squirming on Katie's lap. I didn't even know his name. They'd kept me out of their lives for years, and now they were suddenly dragging their children here to guilt me into helping them. "I've never even met them until today," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You've spent years shutting me out, and now you're dragging them here to guilt me into helping you. That's low, even for you." Lucas's face turned red. "Unbelievable. Do you even hear yourself? You're punishing us for making a mistake, and the only people you're hurting are those kids." "You mean the kids you didn't let me meet for 8 years? I shot back. The toddler started crying, probably sensing the tension. Katie immediately jumped up to soothe him. "Can we all just calm down?" she said, her voice strained. But Lucas wasn't calming down. He was getting angrier by the second. "You're acting like a bitter old man," he spat. "Do you even care about anyone but yourself?" That was it. I'd had enough. I stood up straight and pointed to the door. "Get out, now!" Lucas looked ready to argue more, but Katie grabbed his arm again. "Let's go," she said through gritted teeth, her face pale. They left, but not before Lucas turned back and hissed at me. "You're going to regret this when you're old and alone. Don't come crying to us." The door slammed behind them. I just stood there shaking with anger. I'd been holding on to a small hope that, maybe deep down, they still cared about me. But now I realized the truth. They didn't care about fixing our relationship. They only cared about what I could do for them. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but my mind kept replaying the scene in my office. The audacity of them, barging in like that and acting like I owed them something, was almost laughable. A few days later, They took it a step further. This time it was an email. The subject line read, "Let's start fresh." I opened it more out of curiosity than anything else. It was a long, overly wordy apology. They admitted they'd messed up and said they regretted shutting me out. They claimed they wanted to make things right. But buried halfway through the email was the real reason they were reaching out. "We've been working on a new business idea. It would mean the world to us if you could invest. We're not asking for a handout, just a little help to get started." I didn't even finish reading the email. I slammed my laptop shut and stared at the wall, trying to keep my temper in check. They hadn't changed. They didn't care about reconnecting. They didn't care about me. All they wanted was my money. I didn't respond this time. I didn't even bother pretending to think about it. I was done. I made the decision to cut them off completely. After their constant demands and manipulations, it was clear that Lucas and Katie weren't interested in fixing anything. They just wanted what I could give them. I blocked their numbers, removed them from every social media account, and even changed my email address. I wasn't going to leave any door open for them to use me again. At first, I felt a twinge of guilt. Cutting off my own kids felt drastic, but it wasn't like they'd left me much choice. For 8 years, they had no problem keeping me out of their lives. Now they could stay out of mine. It wasn't easy. There were moments where I questioned myself. What kind of father cuts off his kids? But every time I thought about letting them back in, I remembered how they had treated me, not just recently, but for years. The silent birthdays, the weddings I wasn't invited to, the way they only came around when they needed something. They didn't want a father, they wanted a resource. So I moved forward. I threw myself into work, took up new hobbies, and even started traveling a little. I made peace with the fact that my family wasn't coming back. It was freeing in a way, to stop waiting for something that was never going to happen. Then out of nowhere, Rebecca showed up. It was a Saturday morning. I was just finishing my coffee when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there she was, my ex-wife standing on the porch, looking nothing like the confident woman she'd been when she left me for Thomas. She looked old, tired, worn down. Her clothes were faded. There was a desperation in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Rebecca," I said flatly, "what do you want?" She hesitated for a moment. "Can I come in?" "No," I said, crossing my arms. "Say what you need to say." She swallowed hard and glanced at the ground nervously. "Thomas is gone," she said quietly. "His business went under and he left." "Left as in he just took off?" I asked. She nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "He drained everything we had and disappeared. I have nothing, no one to turn to. I didn't know where else to go." I leaned against the doorframe trying to process what she was saying. "What exactly are you hoping to get from me?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I was selfish and stupid, and I see that now. I threw away the best thing I ever had for someone who didn't care about me. Her words hung in the air, but they didn't hit me the way they might have years ago. I didn't feel angry or vindicated. I just felt nothing. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "but it doesn't change anything. You made your choice, Rebecca. You walked away. Now you're dealing with the consequences. That's not my problem anymore." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't waver. I'd spent too many years letting people walk all over me. I wasn't about to let her back in just because she was desperate. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I needed to tell you. Needed you to know how sorry I am." I nodded once, stepping back into the house. "I hope you figure things out, Rebecca, but this is where we leave it." And with that, I closed the door. After she left, I sat down in my quiet house, feeling a strange mix of emotions. It wasn't satisfaction or triumph. It was closure. For the first time, I felt like I could finally let go of everything, the marriage, the betrayal, the pain. It was all behind me now. I've spent the last few months focusing on myself, on my wife Diana, on my little Amy, on my work, on my hobbies, on my peace. I don't look back anymore. Cutting ties with Lucas and Katie wasn't easy, but it was the right choice for me. As for Rebecca, her apology didn't change the past, but it gave me the final push I needed to move forward. I've made peace with the fact that my life doesn't look the way I thought it would, but it's mine, and I'm finally at a place where that's enough.